Chapter 13. Clan Ordo's victory celebrations continued late into the night. 6 members of the clan, 4 men and 2 women, had died in the battle, a quarter of the casualties they had inflicted on Clan Gendry. Vila had ordered all 30 bodies to be gathered together into a massive funeral pyre. Revan understood this mixing of friend and foe. They were all Mandalorians who had died in battle. By custom, they were all due a warrior's funeral. Regardless of which clan they had been fighting for, the pyre burned for hours, the flames lighting the night and warming the camp, as the brothers and sisters of the fallen recounted tales of their bravery. They honored their memories through song and feast, simultaneously grieving their deaths and celebrating the resounding Ordo victory. The ale flowed freely, but Revan had limited himself to a single mug, because he had fought with Clan Ordo. He was entitled to join the revelry. But though he knew their customs, he wasn't Mandalorian. It was difficult for him to rejoice in the loss of comrades, no matter how honorable their deaths may have been. Revan was also wary of what Vila might do now that she knew he was a Jedi. Hopefully, she just thought he was an anonymous rogue master. If she knew who he really was, there could be trouble. Many Mandalorians despised the Jedi, and Revan in particular. Revan had been responsible for countless Mandalorian deaths, and he had stolen and hidden Mandalore's mask, an act some considered a war crime. Considering Vila's fierce pride in her people and her culture, she probably wouldn't simply forgive and forget. Fortunately, it seemed like she wasn't aware of his true identity. Over the course of the evening, Edric and several others came over to speak with him, making a point to include him in the clan festivities. Everyone seemed to know he had drawn the fire of the enemy basilisks, allowing the pilots to reach their mounts. Interestingly though, none of them knew any of the details of what had occurred out beyond the edges of the main battle. Obviously, Vila had sworn the other pilots to secrecy. He should have taken that as a good sign, but he kept catching glimpses of Vila and the other pilots watching him suspiciously. They might not know he was Revan, but they knew he was a Jedi, and that clearly bothered them. He wasn't sure if Vila had ordered them to stay silent out of respect for what he had done during the battle, or because she thought they still needed him to find Mandalore's mask, or even because of her feelings for Canderous. But whatever the explanation, his secret seemed safe, for now. When he finally climbed into bed late that night, he was surprised to hear Canderous come stumbling into the tent a few minutes later. "I thought you'd be with Vila." "She's not too happy with me right now," Canderous explained. "I'll let her cool down for the night. Sorry about that." "You did what you had to do," his friend answered as he settled into his sleeping bag. "Sooner or later it was going to come out anyway." "How bad is this?" "Vila doesn't like Jedi," Canderous admitted. "But she's hard to read. Hopefully she'll just hold a grudge for a few days." The big man rolled over onto his side. "Either that, or she'll try to kill us on tomorrow's climb." Revan couldn't tell if he was joking. The weather in the morning was the same as every other morning on Rekiad. Freezing cold, with fierce winds and swirling snow that limited visibility. Revan had been hoping for a calm, clear day so they could use the basilisks to fly them up to the top. But even here at the base, unexpected gusts had enough strength to almost knock him off his feet. Higher up, the wind shear and lack of visibility would make an attempted landing on the summit suicidal, even for the most skilled pilots. Dangerous as it was, climbing to the top was the only real option. "Bad conditions for an ascent," Canderous remarked, as they stood at the base of the first spear. "If you're scared, I'll get Edric to take your place and you can watch over the camp." "The old man would probably have a heart attack halfway up," Canderous answered with a grin. "He's only a year older than you," Vila pointed out. "But I'm like a fine wine," he replied. "I get better with age." The playful exchange eased some of Revan's concerns about the mission. Though he still wasn't thrilled by the makeup of the climbing team. There were 8 of them in total. Revan, Canderous, Vila, and the 5 other basilisk riders, including Grizzer, the young man who'd given up his mount to Canderous. Vila's picks made a certain amount of sense. Going after Mandalore's mask was a great honor, and the basilisk riders were among the most respected warriors in the clan. The only other person who might have been included was Edric, but he had been chosen to stay behind to lead Clan Ordo, in case Vila and the others never came back. Yet Revan couldn't help noticing that all of the climbers chosen knew he was a Jedi, and Edric, Canderous' oldest and most loyal friend, was being left behind. He wished he'd had a chance to talk to Canderous before they had left. Now all he could do was keep his guard up throughout the ascent, just in case. They broke into 2 teams of 4, the members of each team connected by a long length of climbing rope. Canderous, Revan, and 2 of the pilots made up the first group. Vila and the other 3 pilots, the second. In addition to their winter clothing and gear, each climber had a 20-kilo pack of supplies and rations strapped across his or her shoulders. The 2 teams began their ascent simultaneously, moving along parallel paths up the sheer vertical surface of the wall of ice that made up the spear's face. Each meter of progress was earned only by hacking into the ice, chipping away with a sharp-ended pick to create a small hold for a hand or foot, then hammering a braced pulley into the wall to secure the climbing rope. The pattern was repeated again and again. Progress was slow and exhausting. A single misstep could send a climber plunging to a quick and gruesome death. Theoretically, the ropes and pulleys connecting each team should allow the other 3 members to bear the weight if one should fall, but none of them was inclined to test the theory. After only 50 meters, the roaring wind was already strong enough to rip away their voices, forcing them to communicate with simple hand gestures. Despite the cold, Revan was sweating heavily beneath his layers of clothing, his body warmed by the steady physical exertion as they battled their way, meter by painful meter, toward the top. At least he was safe from Vila for the time being. The difficult climb required total focus and concentration from every climber as they worked in concert to reach the peak. Even if the Ordo pilots were plotting against him, they simply wouldn't be able to try anything until they reached the plateau at the top. At the start of the climb, the summit was invisible, lost in the swirl of snow and clouds. But by the 5th hour, they had risen above the worst of the storm, giving them their first glimpse of the spear's peak, illuminated by Rekiad's pale orange sun. They were well over halfway to their goal, but exhaustion and fatigue were beginning to impede their progress. As the altitude increased, the air became thinner, leaving all the climbers panting and gasping. The pack strapped to Revan's back seemed to have doubled in weight, and he could feel the straps digging into his shoulders, even through his clothes. But there was little to do except ignore the pain and concentrate on the climb. Vila's team was about 50 meters ahead. Suddenly, one of their riders lost his footing and slipped. He dropped 10 meters before the ropes abruptly stopped his fall, leaving him dangling helplessly at the end of the line. The abrupt stop had jerked his backpack. Combined with the howling winds buffeting him back and forth, he was unable to re-establish a grip on the mountain. Vila and the others began the slow and careful process of climbing back down to help him. It took about 2 minutes for Revan's team to draw level with Vila and her crew as they backtracked to rescue the wayward climber. Realizing the situation was under control, Revan's team pressed on toward the top. 5 minutes after the fall, Revan glanced back down to see that all 4 of Vila's team were once again safely in position. They were not trying to regain the lead, but moved more slowly and cautiously than before. 2 hours later, Revan's team reached the top. Canderous was first. Planting his feet firmly, he reached down to grab Revan's arm and haul him up. Revan did the same for the woman trailing behind him, and she did the same for the man behind her. The top of the first spear was a featureless plateau of slick ice covered by a thin dusting of snow. Looking across the gap between the 2 spears, Revan could see that the other summit was as bare and featureless as this one. "Now what?" Canderous shouted over the roar of the wind. "If this is the right peak, there should be an entrance around here somewhere," Revan yelled back. A gust of wind shoved him sideways, and he almost stumbled. An entrance to what? Revan only shrugged. His vision hadn't shown him what he and Malik had discovered, and no more memories had bubbled to the surface during the climb. They all set their backpacks on the ground and started a grid-pattern search over the plateau's surface. It didn't take them long to find what they were looking for. Near the center of the plateau, under a dusting of snow, was a small durasteel hatch. Revan grabbed the handle and pulled hard, calling on the force to give him strength when he felt his muscles beginning to strain. Slowly, reluctantly, the heavy cover swung open to reveal a ladder leading down into darkness. "You stay here and wait for Vila," Canderous ordered the other two Mandalorians. "We'll go down and check it out." He retrieved several glow sticks from his backpack on the ground, along with a blaster pistol. Revan didn't have a weapon in his pack. Everyone on the climb already knew he was a Jedi, and he was confident the lightsaber at his belt would be enough to deal with anything they ran into. Not that he expected any trouble. It was hard to imagine a more remote, isolated, and inhospitable location. It was easy to see why he had decided to hide Mandalore's mask here. But where was here exactly? Why was there a secret underground chamber built into the spear, and how had he and Malak found it in the first place? Canderous walked over to the hatch and dropped one of the glow sticks into it. It tumbled down, illuminating the length of the shaft as it fell. It stopped some 30 meters below, bouncing, rolling, and then settling on the ground. "After you," Canderous said. As Revan began the long descent, his mind started to spin. Brief flashes of dormant memories exploded into his consciousness, only to vanish before he could fully grasp them. He had an overwhelming sense of déjà vu. He knew with certainty he and Malak had explored the dark chamber beneath the ice, just as he and Canderous were exploring it now. The sights and sounds of his previous visit blended with his current surroundings, the images overlapping one another, obscuring his vision and making him dizzy. It got so bad that Revan had to close his eyes, clinging to the rungs of the ladder with a tense grip. "You okay?" Canderous asked from a few meters above. His voice echoed loudly off the rough-hewn rock walls. "My past is catching up with me," Revan explained, shaking his head to dispel the vertigo. He waited a few more seconds, and when he opened his eyes again, everything had returned to normal. Taking a deep breath, he continued downward until he reached the bottom. The shaft ended in a tight, twisting tunnel that continued horizontally. Resisting the urge to draw his lightsaber, Revan pulled out another glow stick and started down the passage. Canderous followed close behind. The tunnel was narrow, forcing them to walk single file, but the ceiling was high enough that even Canderous didn't have to duck. It didn't take long for Revan to realize that they were walking on a slight decline, going ever deeper into the heart of the spear. The air around them grew warmer, causing them to unbutton their jackets and lower their hoods. As they continued on, Revan began to feel the unmistakable presence of the dark side. His hand dropped to the lightsaber at his belt, but he relaxed as he realized that the sensation was too faint to signify an immediate threat. Once the Force had been strong in this place, but over time, many decades, or even centuries, it had faded away to little more than a memory. Eventually the passage brought them into a large circular chamber hewn from the rock. Easily 30 meters across, the chamber was empty save for a large stone crypt in the center. "What is this place?" Canderous whispered. "I think it's the burial chamber of an ancient Sith Lord," Revan answered. "Like the tombs on Korriban." Why would they bury him here in this frozen wasteland? To his own surprise, Revan knew the answer to that question. He was in exile. He fled here with a handful of his fanatically loyal followers many centuries ago. When he died, they carved out this secret chamber to inter him, so his enemies couldn't find and desecrate his remains. "How do you know that?" Revan shrugged. "I just know. Malak and I came here looking for this crypt. Someone must have told us about it." "You mean someone like Mandalore?" Another memory came crashing in on Revan, triggered by the words of his friend. Mandalore the Ultimate lay dying at his feet. Coughing on the blood welling up in his lungs, he reached up and peeled off his mask, the most sacred symbol of his people. "It wasn't supposed to end like this," he said, his voice soft and low. "They promised me victory. Only now do I see how I was betrayed." Revan tilted his head to the side, puzzled. "What are you talking about? They tricked me. We were never meant to win this war. They used me and my people to test the Republic's strength." "Who used you?" "The Sith." The recollection ended abruptly, slipping quickly back into Revan's subconscious. But in bubbling up to the surface, it had released a host of other trapped memories, and they crashed over Revan like a wave, staggering him. "I remember," he muttered, placing his hand on the wall for support. "I remember." "What?" Canderous asked anxiously. "What do you remember?" Revan didn't answer. Instead, he crossed the chamber to the sarcophagus in the center. Carved into the granite sides was an interweaving pattern of circles and diagonal lines, most likely a family crest or seal. The tomb's heavy stone lid was smooth and unadorned, but as Revan drew closer, he could see marks and scratches along the edges, signs that it had been moved several times. Reaching out to the Force, Revan focused on the lid. After a moment, it began to move, the edge grating along the lip of the lower half of the sarcophagus as it slowly rose into the air. Careful not to let the heavy lid drop, he moved it off to the side and gently lowered it to the floor. Then he stepped up to the sarcophagus and peered inside. There were no remains to be seen. The enemies of the anonymous Sith Lord in the tomb must have found him after all, stealing his mummified corpse for some dark and twisted purpose. The missing body didn't come as a surprise to Revan, and he suddenly remembered that he and Malak had also found the sarcophagus empty. But they hadn't left it that way. Inside was a datacron, a small cube similar to the holocrons used by the Jedi and Sith. However, unlike those powerful artifacts, the datacron was not created using the Force. It was simply a repository of information. But Revan barely looked at the datacron. His attention was gripped by the object that lay beside it, Mandalore's mask. And as he reached in and picked up the sacred relic, his mind flashed back to the moment he had left it there. So Mandalore was telling the truth, Malak said. Did you really think his last words would be a lie? Revan asked. Now what? We have our proof, Revan said. The Sith are not extinct, they have to be stopped. What about the Mandalorians? Without the mask, they are nothing, the empty sepulchre, Revan said. Placing the mask inside, the memory ended, rudely snapping Revan back to the present. He lifted the mask and held it aloft so Canderous could see. The big man walked slowly toward him, as if in a daze. He didn't speak, but as he approached, his hands came up almost involuntarily, his fingers reaching out toward the lost symbol of his people. Neither noticed Vila and the others enter the chamber. How dare you defile Mandalore's mask with your filthy Jedi hands? Vila shouted, breaking the spell that had momentarily enthralled the two men. Revan looked up to see her standing at the cavern's entrance, flanked by the other climbers. All 6 Mandalorians were armed with blaster pistols, their muzzles aimed directly at the 2 men standing by the crypt. Vila, Canderous demanded, what do you think you're doing? Put the mask down and step away from the crypt, she commanded, ignoring him. Moving slowly so as not to alarm anyone, Revan placed the mask back in the crypt. Avner fought beside us, Canderous protested. He led us to Mandalore's mask, and you repay him with betrayal? Vila barked out a harsh laugh. Who are you to talk of betrayal? You turned your back on your people. And for what? To throw your lot in with Revan the Butcher? When did you figure it out? Canderous asked, not bothering to deny the truth. Once he revealed himself to be a Jedi, it was obvious, she said with a sneer. Especially with that name. Did you really think rearranging Revan into Avner would fool us? This isn't about him, Canderous said. It's about me, isn't it? Vila bit down hard on her lip, but didn't answer. I'm not here to claim the mask for myself, Canderous assured her. You're the rightful leader of Clan Ordo. I'm not here to challenge you. You still don't get it, Vila said, shaking her head. You should be our leader, not me. You were our greatest warrior. You were our champion, our hero. When Mandalore fell, you should have been the one to take his place. She looked at him sadly. Instead, you abandoned us. You abandoned me. I'm sorry, Canderous said softly. When our clan fell apart, I was lost. I had to get away. I didn't know what else to do. You could have stayed and helped piece it back together, Vila insisted, her voice cracking slightly as she lowered the blaster in her hand. Sinvedin, Canderous said. I can't undo the past, but I'm here now. That's why I didn't tell the others in the camp, she admitted. I didn't want to destroy your reputation by telling them you fell in with Revan. You didn't tell them because you're afraid they would agree with me, Canderous countered. Revan is not our enemy, not now. Without him, Clan Gendry would have slaughtered us. Without him, we would never have found Mandalore's mask. Revan has proved himself to be our brother, and what you are doing brings dishonor on our clan. No, Vila insisted. You're wrong. Clan Ordo might accept a Jedi, but not him, anyone but him. There's only one way to be sure. We let the whole clan decide. That's not an option, Vila replied, raising her blaster back up. Revan cannot leave this chamber alive. You know Revan's reputation, Canderous warned. And mine. There may be 6 of you, but do you really think you have a chance against us both? We're not here to kill you, Vila told him. Just him.
And you expect me to stand by and do nothing? I expect you to join us,
Vila shouted. You are Mandalorian. Clan Ordo is your family, not Revan. You have to choose, him or us. It doesn't have to be this way, Canderous said evenly. Lower your weapons. End this madness. We'll take Mandalore's mask back down to the camp together. This is your last chance, Canderous, Vila said. Choose. Her hand was trembling, making it difficult for her to aim, but the other 5 held their blasters steady and true. You can't win this battle, Revan said quietly, speaking more to the others than Vila. We killed dozens of Jedi during the war, Vila answered grimly. I'm no ordinary Jedi. Vila, Canderous pleaded, please don't do this. Her shoulders slumped, and she let out a sigh of resignation. Kill them both. Revan was in motion, his lightsaber flashing to life, before the words had finished spilling from her mouth. As Vila and 2 of the others, reacting slightly faster than the rest, fired their blasters, the green blade transformed into a spinning, twirling blur as he used it to deflect their bolts, back in the direction of the shooters. One of the deflected bolts struck its mark, taking down the woman on Vila's left. Canderous and Revan dived for cover behind the sarcophagus just as the other Mandalorians opened fire. Canderous popped up briefly to fire, sending the Mandalorians breaking for cover. There were precious few places to hide in the open chamber, however, and Canderous took 2 of them down before they made it to safety. Vila and the other 2 survivors scrambled back into the passage near the chamber entrance, ducking out of sight around the corner to regroup. A second later, a trio of grenades skittered across the floor, bouncing and rolling to a stop near the base of the sarcophagus. The instant before they detonated, Revan reached out with the Force and hurled the heavy stone lid of the sarcophagus toward the grenades. It acted as a shield, absorbing the worst of the blast before exploding into pebbles and dust. The explosion was deafening, though, the concussive force strong enough to knock both Canderous and Revan off their feet. As Revan struggled to stand up, the only sound he could hear was a high-pitched ringing in his ears. Vila and her team seized the advantage and charged into the room, blaster pistols blazing. All 3 aimed at Revan, who just barely rolled clear in time. From the corner of his eye, he saw Canderous lying on his stomach, arms stretched out in front of him to brace his pistol on the floor as he took careful aim. An instant later, Vila went down from a clean kill shot through her heart. Their attention drawn for just an instant by the body of their leader tumbling to the floor, the 2 remaining Mandalorians faltered. Revan used that moment to unleash a sidearm throw of his lightsaber. The blade went spinning out in a wide arcing path that ended both their lives before they could move. Revan adeptly caught his lightsaber by its hilt as it returned to his hand, then slowly stood up straight, his ears still ringing. Nearby, Canderous still lay on the floor, frozen in the same position he had been in moments earlier. Slowly, Revan approached him, trying to see if he was injured. The big man didn't move until Revan reached down and placed a hand on his shoulder. Then Canderous snapped his head around in surprise. He mouthed something, but Revan couldn't hear what he was saying, so he only shrugged in response. Canderous pushed himself up off his stomach and onto his feet, leaving his pistol on the ground. He walked over to where Vila lay face down on the floor and rolled her over. Her eyes were wide, gazing unseeing up at the ceiling. Tenderly, he closed the lids, then folded her hands over her chest. Then he stood up straight and turned away, staring off into an empty corner of the chamber. After a few minutes, Revan went over to stand beside him. I'm sorry. His voice sounded strange to him. His hearing was still distorted by the grenade, and he wasn't sure if Canderous had heard him. I'm sorry, he repeated, this time more loudly. Canderous turned his head to look at him, turning to stare back at the wall, his words hollow and flat. Me too, he answered, before, me too.